Hi, everybody, and welcome to the November meetup, the joint meetup of Data for Good and CivicTechYYC. And we're thrilled to have two members of the City of Calgary's digital equity strategy team with us this evening, Aaron and Rob. And yeah, this is a fabulous project that's been going on for about a year or so, and they'll tell you all about it. And as we're going through, I'd like you to be thinking about opportunities for how CivicTechYYC and Data for Good can potentially collaborate and help to make this strategy come to life. So with that, Rob, I'll turn it over to you to kind of share the screen, and thanks so much for being here. I know Aaron's in Banff and Rob's with us in wintry Calgary.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for having us. It's interesting to hear the overview, Jeff, when you talk about Inspire, certainly Inspire, and I'll talk a little bit about Enough for All poverty reduction strategy, and I'm certainly familiar with Inspire, and what I can say from my own little place in the world is the impact that tax filing has on people's access to benefits and other income supports is tremendous. So yeah, just thrilled to hear that you're involved with that. So but enough. Well, actually, maybe one more public service announcement for those that and perhaps a misnomer here, are civic minded, because you're all civic minded, you're here. Today, the city 4-year service plans and budget were released, all available online. If anyone's looking for that, I'm certainly happy to provide links to where you can get that. So just a little PSA from the city. But we're not here to talk about the budget. I haven't had the chance to go through it myself, so I won't have much to say. But today, what we'd like to do, as Jeff said, is talk a little bit about the city's digital equity strategy, and I hope people can see that. Just someone give me a thumbs up or hey, see that okay?
Not yet. It looks like it's coming. There you go.
We got okay, there we go. So thanks again. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna start with a little bit of who's who in the zoo. So who's Rob, who's Aaron, talk a little bit about where we find ourselves within the city of Calgary, because we come from two different places, but I think that makes for a great team. Then we're going to go through a little bit an overview of the engagement and research we've been involved with, and talk about what have some of the outcomes of that have been. Highlights just an example of some community-based solutions. Some will be familiar, some will be less familiar to you, and then talk a little bit about our path forward, and certainly leaving some time for some Q&As. And I echo Jeff's invitation around, sort of creative ideas that people have as far as how you might be involved in the strategy going forward. So thanks for that. So just a little, again, I'll start, and then I'll throw it to Aaron, and we'll sort of do our self-introduction. So my name's Rob Wiles. I'm an issue strategist at the City of Calgary. I come to the city with a social work background. I work in an area called community strategies. And community strategies is made up of 4 different work units. There is neighborhood strategies, which is we have community social workers doing community development work in local communities, and supporting communities with identified needs and building on their own strengths. And so we have community social workers working across the city. We also have our community safety strategies. This unit does a lot of work around, you had mentioned the human trafficking. I'm sure there's some interface there with the bylaw folks. And so the community safety strategies does some strategic support work for bylaw services at the city, as well as it includes work around our community safety framework, which the city has instituted. The area I come from, which I'm most familiar with, is the community wellbeing strategies, and it addresses council priority areas through community and City of Calgary strategies and policy. This includes strategies such as the aforementioned Enough for All poverty reduction strategy, age-friendly strategy, which supports an aging population, the Calgary Local Immigrant Partnership, which is a joint municipal federal partnership supporting newcomers to Calgary, community mental health and addiction strategy, as well as corporate policies such as the corporate accessibility policy and the social well-being policy. Additionally, in the community well-being strategies area is our strategic funding, which is based there, and it includes our family and community support services, which is a joint, for those unfamiliar, which is a joint municipal and provincial funding program designed to support the preventative social services in Calgary. So it funds, you know, well over 100 programs in Calgary around preventative social services. And order of magnitude, we're talking, you know, $30 to $40 million injected into the nonprofit social service sector here in Calgary. It has a few other funding envelopes, smaller funding envelopes. For example, a funding envelope that supports the community mental health and addiction strategy. So there's some strategic work for people like myself, but also some strategic funding to help support the community to do the work. There's also, which again is probably of interest, and Jeff will be familiar with this area, and I'm sure others are as well, but we also have our community research and evaluation group, which is an enabling team. They really have a heavy focus internally, but while they have that internal focus, it does work on the development of external products, such as ward and community profiles, which provide a demographic overview of community populations, as well as the equity index, which again, I know Jeff is familiar with, and some others might be as well. So that comes out of that community research and evaluation area. So all of that work together encompasses our community strategies area. And again, just give you a little flavor of where I'm coming from. You know, there's a heavy equity focus within the work that myself and my colleagues do. So that kind of provides my orientation. My portfolio specifically, I do a lot of support around the Enough for All poverty reduction strategy, as well as support for internal city subsidy programs. So for example, the low income transit pass, I've been involved with sort of the strategic side of that program for a number of years now. So just to give you a little context of where I'm coming from, and with that said, I'm going to throw it over to Aaron to give you another perspective of where someone else from the city coming at the digital equity strategy is coming from. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Rob. So yeah, you might have guessed by our doing these introductions that the digital equity strategy is spearheaded by two different groups within the city. So Rob's side, more of the social service side, and then I sit within IT as a project manager on the Smart Cities team. So the Smart Cities team is fairly unique if you're unfamiliar with it. We work across lines of service to sort of address the interconnectivity of technology transformation, innovation, accessibility, and evolving needs and interactions with our citizens to help keep Calgary a resilient city. We do this primarily through 3 different channels, one of which is Living Labs, which helps to support and diversify Calgary's economy by making public spaces, things like transportation corridors and land, more accessible for research and testing of innovative solutions. One thing that most people have heard of but don't know came through Living Labs is the e-scooters that are now widely available across Calgary from multiple different platforms. And another one, which for me is top of mind given the cold weather that we've been having the last kind of week here, is starfish de-icing. So this is relatively new. It mixes starfish extract with sodium chloride to create harmless road de-icer. This de-icer doesn't damage concrete, it doesn't rust cars, and it isn't harmful to groundwater. So that's another innovative thing that's coming through Living Labs. The next sort of prong of the Smart Cities stool right now is the Technology Integration Center, which is currently being developed, and its purpose is to raise the experimental culture at the City of Calgary to allow us to better adapt to the pace of change that's coming out of some of the disruptive innovation platforms. Like blockchain that Jeff mentioned, artificial intelligence, DNA sequencing, and all the technologies that go alongside with these platforms. The Integration Center will be a physical space that isolates the city's production and network as well as our services from potential experimental disaster, but making that data available to folks to try innovative designs. So the space will be safe, it'll be accessible, it'll be frictionless, and it'll be hyper-connected through our robust fiber network that the city owns. And then the last prong is the digital equity portfolio, which is what I focus on. And so, as sort of Rob alluded to, we're looking at helping people with this. So looking at anything that reduces a person's access to or ability to access the internet, devices they need, and the knowledge they need to connect the way they want to online. And with that, I think we can flip. That's our intros. Do you want to? Yeah. So to give you a bit of an idea of what we've done so far on the digital equity strategy, our first step really for building the strategy was to really understand the state of the digital divide within Calgary. So myself and Rob met with a number of local social impact organizations, our arm's reach partners, different businesses, small and large, telecommunication companies, to understand sort of what the online transition has really looked like for folks, particularly during the pandemic, since there was a quite significant shift to things moving online at that time. So the barriers that they or the people that they were supporting were facing, and solutions that were currently underway within Calgary. We weren't overly surprised to learn about the barriers that were faced by organizations and people that they were serving were very similar. So revolving around devices, connectivity, digital literacy skills. Many organizations also had very similar solutions to some of the problems and troubleshooting for those problems. So things like staff acting as tech support, moving their routers around so that they could give greater Wi-Fi access to clients outside of their building or in larger spaces, and just doing things to try to help bridge the gap for some of the issues that we were seeing. We held some workshops, 3 in January, earlier this year. Last winter, we held some workshops and we talked really specifically around the barriers and did some brainstorming on potential actions that the community as a whole within Calgary could take to help close the digital divide. These workshops then led us to the formation of our advisory panel, which consists mostly of folks from the social impact agencies, the Calgary Board of Education, both public and Catholic, post-secondary school boards, and a few folks from the tech industry. Right now, our panel is mostly made up of self-selected individuals, but we did specifically seek out some representation from groups organizations that are either supporting groups or people who belong to groups that have been identified as more likely to be impacted by the digital divide. With some of the help from folks on this panel, we were able to conduct our most recent phase of engagement, which is having conversations with folks who are directly impacted by Calgary's digital divide. And we've done this in 2 different ways, both through sort of invited sessions where we targeted specific subpopulations or vulnerable groups of individuals, and held sessions during either regular program times or events that we were able to let folks know in advance that we'd be coming to talk about digital equity and the digital divide. And then we've also done this through what's called pop-up engagement sessions, where we just set up and chat to whoever wants to talk to us. So not specific populations, but just anyone who happens to be passing through that area. So we held these at places like the library and on C-Train platforms. These sorts of conversations and story sharing really helped us to get a better understanding of the quality of life areas that are impacted by the digital divide, and have really helped to show us that the digital divide, as we know, doesn't start and end with the computer, but it gave a lot more context to that. And so understanding that it's a sense of belonging that comes with the ability to be part of a community, regardless of your geographic location. Time you might get back to spend with your family if you have a device that allows you to easily connect the way you need to, or do work from home, and emotional well-being of not having to choose between your internet or phone line and potentially food for your family or yourself. So understanding this impact allows us to really better measure outcomes and assess effectiveness of any current and potential programs that may be coming into place. We've also tied ourselves into regional and national issues and initiatives. We sit on the Alberta Rural Connectivity Coalition, and we are also participating in Open North's community solutions workshops. So being involved in these communities help us to better unite advocacy efforts for things around the digital divide and understand how Calgary's digital divide is positioned within the province and then within Canada. And it also allows us to be more connected, both physically and socially, because we know the more connections we have, the stronger our networks become. And that was just a whole lot of information. I'm going to toss it back over to Rob to give you a little bit more context on some of the things that we found within this engagement.
Yeah, and I would just invite folks, if you have any questions or comments, you could just pop it into the chat and we'll tackle them as they come along.
For sure. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so as Aaron mentioned, we've gone out, we've talked to service organizations, we've talked to persons themselves, and certainly, you know, the themes are quite strong in terms of what people are telling us are some of their greatest challenges. I guess the best way you can all read, you'll see the screen, but what I would do is maybe just offer a few of the stories we've heard as far as people being able to highlight the challenges that they've experienced. So when we met with representatives from the school board, one of the senior administrations was able to share that a story wherein the teachers were having trouble with one family and the children weren't attending. They had very poor attendance, and this was at the height of public health restrictions, and so, you know, they were trying to problem solve on you know what was going on, and eventually contacted the family. And what the family confided was that they had a device, they had one single device, and were prioritizing their oldest child, who was in grade 12 and was needing that to satisfy grade 12 requirements, and that really came at the cost of the other students, and they were trying to do the best they can, but with only a single device and only able to afford a single device, the students weren't able to participate in their online education. So again, just highlighting that notion of, you know, the affordability aspect around device. Affordability also talks to subscription rates, so people ability to afford either home internet or data plans. That has come up again and again. People talked a lot about, during the height of public health restrictions, how when everything was closed down, those who were relying on the public Wi-Fi infrastructure were most impacted because they weren't able to access those spaces, and ergo weren't able to access their source of internet access. We also have here around access more generally. So access more generally, people have certainly talked about connections. In an urban setting, this is less of an issue, but certainly when we've met with representatives from the Indigenous community, they've talked about the impact for themselves in an urban setting and connecting back to their communities, rural, remote, or on reserve, and how those lack of connections impact them from a quality of life perspective and ability to maintain their informal support networks. Certainly reliability, we had a bit of a conversation about reliability prior to this, and this will be something familiar to everyone. Just how reliable is the internet? How are we able to do the things we need to do with respect to reliable internet? As far as sort of a cross section between affordability and access, there was another story shared with us from the library, and the library talked about this gentleman who would show up each morning during the height of public health restrictions. He would have a laptop in one hand and he would have a milk crate in the other, and he would sit just outside the door. So he was able to access their public Wi-Fi network, and again, when they were able to engage with him and ask him more about it, he was using it as a means to connect with family, but didn't have any connections himself. So again, just highlighting what lack of access can do for people, or what it can't do for people. The other thing we've heard tons about is again related to literacy. And again, the people's ability to use the tools that they have available to them. We heard when we talked with the Seven Brothers Tech Circle, who were supporting and do support some Indigenous persons and specifically Indigenous elders, so they're able to connect with the community. They were able to get the partner with the library, with United Way, to get them a device. They were able to get them a hotspot. And then when they showed up, the elders sort of looked at them and said, so now what do I do? And again, that very fundamental, didn't know how to turn on, didn't know how to access the tools to be able to connect online. And so again, we see a lot of that literacy piece. Erin mentioned within her the summit she's at, talking about security and safety. That has been a recurring theme for people, and their hesitancy to engage in an online world, because they're not sure what is safe and what is not safe. Awareness of resources. We heard a lot about people who just don't know what's available to them. They don't know that some of the telecoms do offer subsidized internet packages, and that was for one Calgary housing outreach worker. That was a big thing that she engaged in through the whole pandemic, was trying to talk to her clients about, you know, the services that they could access to be able to connect themselves online. So that awareness of the resources was a big piece. And then sustainment, you know, when, you know, what do I do when I have my laptop, and how do I keep it updated? How do I ensure that my software is updated? These are things that people wonder about, again, who don't have the strong literacy background and are wondering about. So again, just a bit of a highlight of some of what we heard in terms of our engagement with the community at large. And that's not all, you know, again, I don't want to leave with a sense of only doom and gloom. Certainly through our travels, we've heard a lot. And again, this group would be a strong example of that, of the good things that can happen, and how technology can overcome other barriers. Last week, if people were able to participate in the Center for Social Impact and Technology, Robbie Babbins-Wagner, who is the executive director of the Calgary Counseling Center, talked about her pivot of her organization and moving the counseling services online, and how that has been so well received from the clients that she serves. And what it, in speaking with her a bit more, what she was sharing was, it overcomes other barriers like transportation. It overcomes childcare issues that people were facing in trying to address, in trying to get to counseling services in a person-to-person format. And she says almost entirely it's moved online. The services they offer are being offered online. We also heard about YYC Connect, which is a group of emergency counseling organizations who have got together to provide a single portal where people can access and get the first available appointment if they're looking for emergency counseling. And so again, using technology to overcome other barriers is certainly what we know as part of why we're oriented to see how we can better connect people and overcome some of the challenges and barriers that was available.
So Rob, there's a question around, is there a report or data that you guys have put out as a result of what you've been working on? I know that there is, so maybe just as you get a chance, maybe pop some of those into the chat box. That would be great, and we'll also try to include them in our note that will go out after the session with the slide deck and the recording as well. So thanks, Rob.
Awesome. No, and I see Erin's 3 steps ahead of me, which is per usual, and has popped a single connection there. We'll get you a couple different reports. The other thing we did was we engaged with the university, and I'm going to turn it back to Erin to talk a little bit about the work we did with the university.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Rob. And funnily enough, I mentioned the reports right now. So yeah, so while we've been having conversations with with organizations and folks that are impacted. We were also working with the university to understand really globally what's happening with the digital divide. We actually went through the Urban Alliance to find a researcher that would be interested in taking this on, and ended up partnering with Dr. Tarun Chowdhury, so out of the University of Calgary. He's with the Community Health and Sciences. And so he and his team performed a systematic exploration of existing research findings, policy recommendations, and practical experiences on issues associated with digital equity, specifically in urban populations, and like with similar geography, which isn't very many. So we opened it up more broadly to urban populations. But the research really, it highlighted that the overarching issues of the digital divide are quite greatly embedded in pre-existing inequalities, and the divide is not an outcome of any singular barrier, but rather the cumulative effect of multiple factors that are creating uneven conditions for Calgarians, which again we were seeing in our public consultations. So on the screen, you see a list of subpopulations, and these are the groups that were identified as being particularly vulnerable to barriers creating the digital divide due to pre-existing inequalities. The research paper highlights how barriers making up the digital divide interplay with each of these subpopulations, and I'll encourage you to read that paper if you have time. It's a great read, and it's available on calgary.ca/digital equity, which I've popped in the chat now. You can also find a report that includes the engagement we did at the initial phases of this. So I think we put that out in June, so it didn't include any of the now conversations we've had with lived experience folks. So based on the findings that came out of this research paper, we determined that the actions that we're taking and solutions that we are developing need to really address all aspects of the digital divide to allow our citizens to get support in the areas where they need it most, which is what makes that advisory panel that I chatted about a few minutes ago, and the unique voices that come with that so important if we really want to be able to remove barriers that are keeping Calgarians from accessing internet devices or knowledge that they need to connect online in the way they choose to. And Rob, I'll toss it back to you. Maybe.
And I'll unmute myself. I just wanted to build a little bit on what Aaron was saying in terms of how digital divide and lack of access is embedded fundamentally in other equity considerations. And an example of that is this subpopulation group. But last week, the report on from the National Advisory Council on Poverty looked at poverty rates and the most current data around poverty rates. And while there was some encouraging data trends as far as poverty rates overall across Canada, when you look at some of the subpopulations for poverty, they line up really well with these subpopulations that you see on your screen that are impacted by digital equity. And again, not a surprising finding, but just generally speaking, when we look at Indigenous persons have experienced poverty at twice the rate of sort of Canadians overall. Newcomers, persons with disabilities, all have higher rates of poverty. So again, these are fundamentally based in other inequities, and we must continue the good struggle, if you will, in terms of overcoming those inequities as well. So just a little information there to highlight. One of the things the research did was also talk about building on good work that already exists in the community. And again, the groups here are great examples of that. But we wanted to take an opportunity to highlight some of the other good work that's happening around these challenges and barriers. So again, just a small cross section of great work that's already going on in here. One, Calgary Learns. Calgary Learns is a foundational adult literacy, adult learning organization here in Calgary. They actually went forth and developed a digital audit tool for organizations. And so what that digital audit tool does is has the organization ask themselves questions around how are they delivering their services and their programs online. Are they making consideration for mobile devices and fillable forms using mobile devices? Are the forms that they use available outside of an online presence to make sure that those who really don't have access can still access the programs and services that they need? So again, a great example of good work. They're doing a number of different other adult learning workshops with persons who are delivering those programs and services to again increase their awareness of digital literacy within the community. So again, an incredible piece. I won't say too much about Inclusivity because I'm way out of my lane on this one, given the audience that I'm presenting for. But again, I know you're familiar with Inclusivity and the inclusive user testing. But one thing Jeff has been very strong as far as making the connection with is the digital literacy skills being built while the user testing is going on, so that those are participating can also build their digital literacy skills and knowledge. And so again, just a great example of some work that's overcoming some of the challenges and barriers, while certainly including the voice of those who perhaps are experiencing the inequities themselves. Erin, I think you were going to chat about a couple of them as well.
Yeah, so you have on there as well the public library. So right now the public library is a great spot for free Wi-Fi. They also have like routers that you can take with you and devices you can access while at the library for a few hours during the day. They expanded this device lending during the pandemic to allow folks to be able to borrow devices for, I believe it's up to 6 weeks, though the wait list was quite long and is still quite long, which speaks to the demand for this sort of program for access to devices. Additionally, they're rolling out now some more basic literacy programs that will help folks to understand how to get online and how to do so safely. So, and again, I'll reference back to our panel and like what's the point of this information is that as we're building this strategy, we're looking at all the things that already exist and are working really well. And our goal with our advisory panel is to co-develop a community designed and executed strategy that addresses sort of the main dimensions of the digital divide and looks at the great things that are already happening within our city. So though the city, we have yet to roll out any new programs ourselves, we've been working with our fair entry team to add some digital divide components to the existing fair entry assessment. So if you're not familiar with fair entry, it's a single point of entry to City of Calgary subsidy programs. So this low income assessment determines is a process that determines eligibility and refers citizens to various different City of Calgary programs, such as the low income transit pass and recreation passes. And so our hope is to add subsidized internet access and device access to fair entry. We've had conversations internally with procurement about recycling of municipal devices to help add something onto this sort of program, and also externally with some of the larger telecommunication companies around allowing fair entry to be an access point for citizens to be able to connect with currently existing subsidized internet packages that are federally regulated. And I think that's all I have. Rob, did I miss anything? Did we miss anything
Well, I
collectively?
was just we wanted to highlight, we also want to highlight the good work of Charles Buchanan and his work in his group, as far as a concept that he has around connectivity. And again, full credit to Technology Helps, which is a social enterprise here in Calgary, for those not familiar, and provides tremendous support to the nonprofit community around technology and digital transformation. But the concept that Technology Help, and Charles more specifically has put forward, is this notion of a digital community hub, wherein some social service organizations who see clients already would add digital literacy, digital access, hardware access to sort of the broader assessment that they're doing around a community member, and then giving them the knowledge and the tools to be able to connect those people to the needed resources they can access, and in turn be able to access all of these other quality of life outcomes. Again, full credit. Charles and his team put together this lovely graphic, which is, I think, is a great illustration of the, when on the outer rim to the right hand side, it really highlights the quality of life issues that are impacted when access is present. And I think that's a kind of a fundamental piece that underlines all of this. And so just wanted to highlight again, building on good work that's already going, and there is work already going on in the community, and it's something that we, with respect to a digital equity strategy, would want to enhance and continue to improve upon, and to allow people to have that better access, and in turn be able to access the quality of life issues and overcome other barriers that they are facing in their lives. So that's in a real quick way. We wanted to provide a bit of an overview of what we were up to. Certainly open to any questions that may arise. And if saving that, we could introduce a few questions ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. We can maybe, if you stop sharing, we can open it up to folks. Certainly, you can put your question in the chat, and we'll pass it on. But if you want to unmute yourselves, just raise your hand, and we'll kind of ask you as we go along. But just a question to you guys about, okay, so you've done a bunch of background work, and I think that's still ongoing. So what's sort of the timing as to how you're going to consolidate, come up with priorities, and actually then create the strategy?
So we did do with the brainstorming of actions, we actually did do prioritization of those actions already, and that was done through an online tool, so it was a bit more widely open than potentially workshop attendance. So that information is available online in the report that's up there on the website. It's the stakeholders report from June. So it's ish done. Okay. And really it was the priorities that were like Calgarians identified were really reinforced with the research once we got that that information.
So like in terms of the output, so you're creating a digital equity strategy. Is that going to be a document or a living list, or like what is that going to look like when you're kind of done?
Yeah, and I'm like virtually looking at Rob to see if he has a better answer, because I would say
no.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So the intent at the end of the day would be certainly, Jeff, as you're suggesting, would be a strategy document that would build on not only highlighting what we heard, which is again some of which we've already created, but again working with the advisory group, the group, to begin to say, okay, we have these priorities that we've talked about. How, what might be the path forward to address these challenges and barriers in our community? So again, building on what's already being done, but also, is there something we can co-create together? And again, I think organizations like the Social Impact for Technology group that you're involved with, I think also provides a great avenue into groups that traditionally at the city we haven't engaged with, like those social enterprise organizations that bring perhaps more creative solutions to the table. But really, it'll be something that we want to build and co-create in terms of over an overall strategy of what are the high points as far as addressing these challenges and barriers. I don't know if I answered your question at all, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I think that's good, and I think ultimately what it turns into are practical, tangible, projects and initiatives that start to make a difference. And I mean, and for the folks on this call, I mean, in terms of Data for Good and CivicTechYYC and Inclusivity. So I mean, we're sort of keenly and I sit on the advisory board with a number of other organizations as reference. So I mean, what we're really interested in is in digital literacy and sort of data literacy, and how we might be able to roll out some programming that would really, and it could be at a community hub, whether it's a digital hub or a physical hub, because those physical hubs exist as well, right? And I think there's 6 or 7 across Calgary. So
absolutely,
yeah.
And we have been having the conversations with those hubs to see who has capacity and is interested in being involved with potentially piloting some of these programs that are sort of already going. So for the timeline part of that question, we opted to do more robust engagement and conversations within the community, so as not to reinvent the wheel or solve the wrong problem, versus getting a strategy out as quickly as possible. We'd rather get the right thing out. So that's where some of the delay too.
Yeah, for sure. And as we kind of try to formulate with partners, we don't want to do it ourselves, but we want to work with some of the partners creating digital literacy, data literacy type of programming. This is where the volunteers come in, right? So all of us on the call this evening, you can see ourselves maybe volunteering, right, to give a workshop at a community hub or in a library, that and also we're thinking about curating data resources to create a community data hub that would then kind of be a single point where folks could go to get data about their community. But many people wouldn't have the skill sets or knowledge to actually use that data. So again, coming back with some programming that would help to increase data literacy so that folks can really know where to get the data and start to learn how to use it as well. So this is kind of in the works. The wheels are turning.
Yes.
We'll kind of announce that as things roll out. There is a question about how much can a census aid to answer questions about some of the digital barriers. So I know the city does a census every year, and there's also the stats can, which is, I mean, it's coming out this year, but it's every like 5 years. But so maybe.
Yeah, and what we found when we look at some of the census and related statistics Canada piece, it's good to paint a national picture, but it becomes very much a national average. And again, I feel like I'm very intimidated to talk to this group because when I talk about data, because this is a heavy lifting data group, but it becomes this blurring of information. And it doesn't really get down to the sort of the Calgary level. And that was one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure that the engagement was robust, that we could go out and talk to Calgarians about this, because again, at least in the work that we've done, the data at a City of Calgary level just wasn't telling a good enough story. And so I'm not sure if that answers the question, but we just felt that it was at a too high of a geographic level to tell a good story.
Yeah, no, I think the equity index, for example, is a great tool that has about 20 or 30 indicators on there, and I know that the intent is to expand that equity index to other parameters as well, right? So maybe there's some digital equity, data collection that can then be displayed through the equity index.
Absolutely, and interesting using that same sort of data approach, Jeff. The City of Ottawa did some work. And what they did was they looked at some of those subpopulations most impacted, and did an index assessing digital divide, assessing communities with high levels of digital divide, if that's the right term, or in need of digital equity, and use that as a target for some of their mesh network approaches. And so they were looking at some mesh network approaches and used the subpopulation data. So they didn't have specific digital equity data, but used those subpopulations where those groups were overrepresented at a geographic level, and then use that to target their intervention. So another way to use similar data as far as targeting interventions.
Great. Any other questions? Anybody want to ask questions? Or I know Rob is asking us some questions about our experiences with
what would a city successfully? I do see another question.
Okay.
I'm just reading it.
Okay.
So I'm gonna like be a little bit cheeky and say, no, there aren't cities really successfully performing digital equity as a whole. So there's a number of cities that have done great work in addressing like one or sometimes two pieces of the digital divide, but as of yet, we haven't heard of anyone addressing all three barriers. So there's a few, and I again, virtually looking at Rob, we heard great stories, Geo Nova Scotia addressing the access to internet piece and devices, but not the literacy side. And they did fantastic work in getting folks connected with, again, devices and free internet. And we're looking to spin that up to being a pay what you can sort of service, because people wanted to be able to contribute something with what little they were able to do, but those folks hadn't yet brought in the literacy piece. And then there's a few areas that are doing literacy, but they don't have the devices. So yes and no. There's great work being done, but there's no one that has really solved the whole problem yet. In the research that we've done, and the communities that we've talked to, sort of across Canada. So,
and I was going to say, Aaron, and the other side of that question is sort of us, us as meaning the city staff side of us, the city looking at itself and how we're delivering services, and that's probably another area we've spent a lot of time looking outward, but that's that inward focus. And there's a digital strategy group that looks at standards within the city, and I just attended a meeting yesterday, and they seem quite open to this concept of how does the city offer services in an equitable, in a digitally equitable fashion, so that's another way to sort of look at this. And I think that's something that's evolving, because one of the, and I won't get this right, and Erin will correct me, because she's the one that's coined it for me anyways, in terms of making sure that while we can realize a lot of efficiencies, we can realize a lot of barriers overcome by offering digital services, we need to make sure that we're offering services in other fashions as well. So again, trying to play both ends of it in terms of making sure that our services are accessible. What was it? What's the term you?
We're saying that, like, technology first, but not technology only.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Well, I know.
Yeah.
Any other questions coming up?
So Sean, great question around Indigenous organizations. So a couple pieces, and again, it's never enough in sort of my humble opinion. So with respect to Indigenous organizations, I did speak to the Seven Brothers Tech Circle, and for those unfamiliar with the Seven Brothers Tech Circle, it's it sits under the Vibrant Community Calgary's Indigenous Advisory group. And they did a lot of work. They were very, very active within the height of public health restrictions. And we did speak to representatives of that Seven Brothers Tech Circle. And there they spoke, you know, of some common issues of affordability, common issues around literacy. But they also talked about that connection and an invisible barrier or border, if you will, between urban and rural. And they really were quite emphatic about saying, you know, you can't think of it as rigid City of Calgary boundaries, and this is the only focus. If you're thinking about an Indigenous community, that the boundaries then become artificial. And again, that ability to have access in a rural, remote sense was also a very prime issue. So we may not think of that in terms of an urban setting, but it was a real issue and a challenge for persons who are Indigenous residing in an urban setting, and their ability to connect with their community who may remain on reserve. And so that's a huge, huge issue for them. We also had USAY, the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth. I got it. I usually don't get it. And they're like, for those who aren't familiar with USAY, and some of the work they're doing with respect to engaging with Aboriginal urban youth and using technology, as well as taking us all on journeys of truth and reconciliation through using digital tools. They have an Indigi Trails, which is a teaching module where people can learn more about the history of residential schools. And yeah, some incredible work. They're also doing some engagement with their youth on our behest. One of the things they identified for us was issues with engagement around trust. And their comment was, it would be better if our staff engaged with the youth and then provided the information back to you, which we were more than happy. So we met with staff from USAY and then provided them with some, you know, loose guidelines as far as what we were seeking, and we're anxious to hear back from them. But yeah, an incredible organization.
I did get one email back that I haven't been able to look at yet, so I'm
Okay.
very excited to see what that says.
A great question, Sean. Thank you so much for raising it, and again, an incredibly important perspective for us to consider as we move forward.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I know there's some time constraints on folks, so I think we'll kind of wrap it up there. But I think there's kind of an open invitation, you know, for folks to reach out, you know, to Rob and to Aaron, and to look for opportunities to get involved as the digital strategy rolls out. So thanks again, you know, for the great work that you guys are doing and the contribution you're making. And yeah, we really look forward to where this is going. It really is important work for all of us.
Thanks for the opportunity, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks so much.